I can finally do it. I can finally reveal the camera that has been on my hip for the past week, with these pieces of black tape that made it look a little too generic. Because generic is definitely not the word to describe this camera, given the unique creative features that it is trying to introduce. And as a pretty radical new take on an L-mount camera, this new direction for Panasonic is certainly going to have people talking. But those discussions might get quite heated. Say hello to what might be a pretty polarizing new release from Lumix, one that I am not afraid to admit I really love. Hey, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here is the Panasonic Lumix S9 Week 1. Okay, quick disclaimers. You probably all know that I've been running around Japan for the last week or so, and that journey actually started in Osaka, where Panasonic had their Lumix Global Summit and announced the brand new Lumix S9. That's where we're going to start this 1 week off with, a pseudo-vlog of sorts, and that is appropriate because Lumix is marketing this camera as a tool for content creators. And that terminology does kind of fit me, especially in a travel scenario. So I'm choosing to keep things a little casual for this first video because honestly, I'm kind of on vacation still. But I'll come back and talk about what worked and what didn't with the Lumix S9 soon. For now, I'd like for you to tell me what you think of what you're seeing in the photos and videos here in the comments below. But let me tell you, the actual announcement was a foreshadowing of the roller coaster of emotions that this camera has taken me on. At first, it felt like this camera was basically everything that I've wanted from a Lumix. Smaller form factor with the same great stabilization and color science that has made me keep basically every Panasonic camera I've ever used. So I will admit my bias is showing a little bit here, but let's face it, there are quite a few people in my position too who have been waiting for Panasonic to make a compact full-frame camera. And they did it. But maybe not in the way that some of those people wanted. That's the roller coaster ride I've been talking about. Now, with a smaller body, we just have to expect some compromises in the handling and the controls. All of the space that the Lumix S5 was afforded made for multiple dials, dedicated buttons for exposure settings, and plenty of customizable function keys. Most of that is gone, and it's a bit of a head scratcher why they didn't try to at least put 1 or 2 more buttons in places where there is clearly some space. The lack of an EVF means reliance on the fully articulating screen, which does its job well enough, but I know there are some photographers out there who really prefer to bring their eye up to something. And then there's this cold shoe up here. That means there aren't going to be any interfaces with accessories, let alone the dashed hopes of an attachable EVF. Oh, and for the video shooters who really need to monitor audio, you just won't be able to. We're going to be putting a lot of faith into the mic jack and the connected microphone. At the very least, Panasonic figured out how to fit the batteries from the S5 II in here, so battery life hasn't been too shabby so far. One thing though is that the SD card is right next to that battery. This all results in a camera that is ultimately a bit more fashion forward rather than function driven. After all, Panasonic is releasing a slew of colors, and my unboxing that I did film, that I'm gonna post on social media soon, it showed off the blue version, but I requested and got the green edition as soon as I possibly could. So while I miss my dials and my tactility and whatnot, I have to at least appreciate the fact that Panasonic is trying to appeal to a crowd that maybe doesn't mess around with things like raw video capture or even shoots in full manual all the time. So I think that the term content creator does fit here because you're just trying to get a streamlined workflow, and we're going to talk about that workflow in a bit. I also think that the term content creator gets a bad rap because it's supposedly a hip thing to be these days, but that doesn't mean this camera is any less capable of outputting some great results. And yet there are reasons why this camera may not be on the top of your list if you're not looking for this specific set of features. There is one main reason for that. You hear that? No, you barely hear that. You don't hear anything at all because it's not a mechanical shutter that you're hearing on here. As one of the compromises made to create this smaller body for the sensor coming straight out of the S5 II, the S5 had to go electrical. Now for me personally, this is a bummer simply because I don't have that tactile feel or satisfying sound of the curtain hitting. I just have this little sound coming out of the tiny speaker. But also sometimes an electrical shutter can mean some issues in shooting certain lighting conditions. I see it as a concern whenever the lack of a mechanical shutter is discussed in cameras. Still, it's a bummer that one of those satisfying feelings in photography isn't represented here because I do love taking photos with this camera, and we'll get to why in a second. But first and foremost, as a YouTuber, I had to see how the camera would fare in my line of work. That means I always be shooting, especially when I'm in a beautiful place like Osaka, and then Kyoto the next day.
We're actually out here in Kyoto, and we're going to be going to a couple of the main historical landmarks, but also we're doing a tea ceremony today. That's exactly something that is right up my alley. You know, I have to say, it's really fun to just run around with a nice camera and get all the footage and all the photos that you need. And that's when you start to really get that aha moment when it comes to any camera. I'm feeling that right now with the Lumix S9. I think vlogging on this has been about as easy and as good as it can be. And it's exactly the same experience that I was having with the Lumix S5, like for example, or the S5 II rather. Like for example, when I brought it to Korea and I got some great footage out there. I feel like I'm getting the same experience here, but now it's in a more compact body. And the limitations that are being set on this camera, given its size and given what it's trying to do, I'm not butting heads with it quite as much yet. I think that's a really good thing. Although I will admit, you do have to make sure you're getting into the settings all the time to make sure that things are where you need them to be. I was in the high stabilization mode earlier, but I can go all the way to off and just do these chill walk and talks. The thing is, I had to remember to change that setting, and now here it is. A little bit better to be able to show off all of the area around me. Unfortunately, right now, the issue is, well, there's so many people. And it's kind of hard to really take in the sights and to really enjoy what is around us when, well, there are droves and droves of people constantly going in and out of this area right now. And everyone's just vlogging and just...
In the middle of the tea ceremony, my Duolingo goes, time to practice Japanese. I'm like, you have no idea where I am.
That's where the next dip in the roller coaster happened. Recording limits. I really want to know your thoughts on this next part because I've been going back and forth with it for a while now. Almost every single shot that you're seeing in this video was taken in under a minute, further cut down in the editing booth. Unless I'm sitting down to get talking head A-roll like I'm doing right now with the Panasonic S5 II, I'm not going anywhere near the 10-minute limit that is here on the 6K open gate recording or the 15-minute limit on the 4K 16:9. And on the topic of temperatures in general, I haven't gotten any warnings yet about heat on this camera, and I've been getting B-roll all over the place and consistently during a couple of especially hot days here in Tokyo. Time will tell as I head to warmer climes in the next couple of weeks whether that actually happens. But I would say as long as you're not recording podcasts and interviews and A-roll exclusively, I don't think these recording limits are more than a minor nuisance for most content creators. Because what this sensor brings to the video side of things should not be overlooked. I just mentioned it, but 6K open gate recording is a huge feature for people who post on multiple platforms. You get the full area of the sensor to play with, doing minor composition adjustments when you're shooting to make it so that you can still cut out a vertical video with all the resolution needed for high quality Instagram Reels, TikToks, and YouTube Shorts. I've been using OpenGate with my S5 II since I first got it, and now it's in a form factor that is easier to handle and maneuver, making cinematic B-roll even easier to capture on the move. Speaking of moving, stabilization. This is a big boon for Panasonic, and just recently they released a firmware update for the S5 II that introduced the high video stabilization mode. A modest but very noticeable crop is introduced to create some of the most stable footage I've ever captured handheld. And now it's all on the S9 in a body style that I can use by gripping the camera with one hand and then walking gingerly for my smooth shot. It's pretty damn great. I knew after the S5 II got that firmware update that it had to be coming to whatever was being announced next, and I'm glad I was right. You might be noticing that I'm making sure to list what lens I'm using on certain days of this trip. That's deliberate because for each day I was trying to test certain configurations of this camera to see what might work for most people. The very first lens I tried out was the 20 to 60mm kit lens, a fantastic option to start out with and even stick with in some cases because of its reach and respectable aperture ranges. I think it worked as an all-purpose lens, but I would actually say that unless you're looking to do handheld vlogging, especially with the high stabilization at 20mm, the 28 to 200 here that was recently released graduates the kit lens into a full-blown all-purpose travel lens. Of course, if you're going for more of a vlogger setup, I'd say the Sigma contemporary zooms are the way to go. Both the 16 to 28mm 2.8 for the walk and talks and the 28 to 70 2.8 for all of the B-roll. It's these two zoom lenses that have been getting me the lion's share of great footage and photos, as well as the great handheld talking head footage. The mixture of the APS-C crop and the high stabilization modes actually make the far end of the 16 to 28mm at least 50mm effectively. I can't do the quick maths right now, but ultimately you have some options for reach if you really need to just keep one lens on here and never switch out during the day. Now, a brand new feature that also proved really useful, MP4 Lite. If nothing else, not the colorways, the styles, the size of the camera, if nothing else tells you how much the S9 is geared towards content creators, this is the feature that proves it. Open gate and 4K video on cameras like this is great and all, but if you've ever been on location trying to get footage from the camera to social media platforms with little fuss, well, you know how much of a struggle it can be. That's where this specially made codec comes into play, as it is specifically tuned to be easy to transfer via the Lumix Lab app, then edited, then posted, with little fuss and little time wasted. If you've been following me on Instagram stories for the past week, now you know how I've been able to share my experiences at such high quality. I won't go as far as to say it's a game changer, but it is absolutely making life easier for someone like me. The resolution is 3.8K and it's locked at 30 frames per second, but as someone who isn't a super stickler for all of those details all the time, I feel like I can still get away with using that open gate format to get both horizontal and vertical video for YouTube and social media in one go. And for the sake of that experiment, I'm not labeling what modes or what codecs I shot any of the footage in, just the lens. Let me know if you can tell in the comments, and let me know what you think of the quality. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Social media content, shooting like this all the time, doesn't have to be anything more than smartphone capture if you have a good enough camera on your phone. After using this MP4 Lite mode for a couple of days and getting feedback from my fellow content creator friends, I have to disagree. The last camera that I felt was really trying to shake up and make easier the way that people like me capture and share footage was this little guy right here, the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, which I still use often and I actually used for some of this video. And I'm going to be talking about it soon on my channel. But the 1-inch sensor on here, which is practically straight out of a smartphone, is still easy to spot for me, and I can tell when it is being used. Meanwhile, the ease of use, the stabilization, and the color manipulation of the S9 is about as easy to maneuver onto mobile devices as the Osmo Pocket 3, only now it's a full-frame sensor behind all that quality. I think that's pretty big, and given how smoothly I've been able to do it on an even pre-production camera unit and a 1.0 version of the new Lumix Lab app, I think it's a pretty big step in the right direction. And finally, Lumix Lab, a new app from Panasonic that is going to eventually replace the other Lumix apps and now adds in robust editing tools for MP4 Lite videos and photos that has led to results such as this. How? Well, most of you might know the answer: lookup tables, or LUTs for short. A lookup table adds all of the colors and style to a base profile with results that are far deeper than your average filter. Much of this processing is usually done in apps like Lightroom and via editing raw captures, but the S9 is looking to do it all either in camera or via the app. A bunch of sample LUTs are already installed on the camera, but you can find more in the app either from Lumix themselves or from creators who have dialed in their own looks and are sharing them to Lumix Lab. This is where some of the most fun I've had in a camera comes in. I found Emily of Micro 4 Nerds on the creator page and transferred her streetwise look to my camera, where dozens of them can be stored. Then, while shooting photos and videos at the base profile of Cine D, I was able to apply it and see the look in real time. That's what this button is for right here, hence real-time LUTs. If you're able to find a bunch of LUTs and play around with them, you might find a look that is really to your liking, making the photo taking and video shooting experience feel pretty effortless. The last time I had this much fun trying out different looks to my photos, it was the film simulations of the Fujifilm X100VI. But those were highly curated film simulations, and now there is the added level of freedom that really promotes creativity here on the Lumix S9. So much so, in fact, that I went ahead and created my own LUT, and you've been seeing it a few times in this video. I've always been intimidated by the prospect of making a LUT because I never know what really looks good, or I feel like I don't. But while I was out in the Ghibli Park in Nagoya, I decided I wanted more greens in my shots because I'm a tea lover. I figured the best place to put them is in the shadows, so that it's a little bit more of a subtle effect in most photos. I also love the color yellow, so clearly I like a warm tone, so I used the same split toning to add a little bit of yellow in the highlights. The result is my own LUT, I called it Steeped, that works wonderfully in daytime scenes, especially when there is a lot of separation in highlights and shadows. I was told it even looks like it's something out of a film camera, and that's a compliment I never knew I wanted to hear. And like I said, Panasonic is making it as easy as possible to put these looks into content. You use this LUT button to start baking them into the shooting process, or you can hit the raw processing feature in playback to not just apply it, but even change its intensity, or you can just transfer the photos and videos to the app for adding on the LUTs there. It feels like an ecosystem of sorts, and while it may not be for everyone, it's a feature that really sets this camera apart, on top of other features like open gate and stabilization, of course. Okay, back on the topic of lenses, I think if you're looking at this camera as a compact travel shooter, primes might be the way to go. Lumix S primes are great, but Sigma managed to make theirs more compact at the cost of smaller apertures. This Sigma 45mm 2.8 was a standout during a night out with the fellow creator friends, and it just makes this camera look really good. Like, it really suits this thing. And finally, there is the newest prime lens, the pancake cover lens, or the, let's call it body cap lens, in the 26mm f8 manual focus. This is where I actually do raise an eyebrow a little bit, because Panasonic trying to champion their hybrid phase detect autofocusing system then gets followed up by a really cheap plastic lens that is basically all about zone focusing. Now, I'm not opposed to that, don't get me wrong. And also, focus peaking is always an available tool. But maybe I'm not just among those people who will just go f8 and be there, or focus to infinity and go to town. It is fun to experiment with, I'll give you that. And with the crop zoom, there is potential for some reach at the expense of resolution. But honestly, using this lens just made me think about picking up the compact Sigma 24mm f3.5 instead. I'm still wondering if I should. Just like I'm still wondering how to feel about the Lumix S9. On the one hand, the person in me that wants this camera to be literally everything, to be the biggest bang for buck, to have everything in this compact package, knows I'm trying to defy the laws of physics. I think this camera wants to too. It's about as hybrid a camera as you can get. A good 24 megapixel sensor with incredible stabilization, but no mechanical shutter. Open gate recording, but 10-minute recording limits. A dedicated love button for experimentation, but a lack of tactility to really drive the experience of shooting photos home. And of course, a price tag that may not be too far away from the big sibling that has or will have all of these features, the Panasonic S5 II. As a proud owner of 2 Panasonic S5 IIs, I can tell you it is still the best balance of value and feature set available right now. But what L-mount needed was a viable option in a smaller size, and that's exactly what the S9 is. You could spend a little bit more, and by a little bit more I mean like $500 unless you find one on sale, to get the S5 II, but then you're getting a much bulkier camera, which, believe me, isn't the most comfortable to use as a travel camera or as a fast-paced content creator. I literally brought the S5 II with me on a trip last year to Korea, and while I loved the videos and I loved the content that I made out there, I really wished that it was just easier to lug around. And this has definitely fulfilled that need. So if you get nothing else from me sharing my week 1 with this camera, you should really ponder what you need out of your camera, and maybe even realize that some cameras are for some people and not for others. For me, right now, as someone running around Japan trying to make some cool content to share with all of you in the coming days, I firmly believe that the Lumix S9 really suits me. And even if my feelings on this camera have been a roller coaster as I've described it, it's been a damn fun one too. And so, there you have it, the Panasonic Lumix S9 after 1 week. Once again, let me know what you think of all of the photos and videos that you saw here, and I want to extend my gratitude that you came to check out my thoughts on this kind of radical new camera from Panasonic. I couldn't be more thankful for you watching my camera content, because it's part of the reason why I'm even here in Japan still, and I'm going to be staying for a little while, so thank you. From there though, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one and come back to you with my final thoughts on the Lumix S9 soon. Thank you so much once again for kicking it with me again today. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and enjoy your tea, everybody.